It's great to be at Powell's. Powell's is a great place. There's only a few places like this in the country, and you ought to know how lucky you are. You know, you ought to appreciate it. It's wonderful. I wish I were younger and didn't like money so much, because I would live in a place like this. I don't really want to talk for a very long time. I'm kind of tired of sounding my own voice. So I'm going to try and talk just for about maybe 15, 20 minutes, and then we can have a conversation. The last time I spoke at Powell's, when I published When Presidents Lie, I was scheduled on a night that they had a presidential debate, and very few of you were here. It was really bad. It wasn't as bad as the night that I spoke in Boston when the Red Sox and the Yankees were playing the same game. But actually, it's not that I lack ego, because believe me, it's not that I lack ego. But I'm actually always happy whenever anybody's here. The first two stops of this tour didn't happen. The first one, the books didn't arrive. It was New Orleans, you know, like not everything's together yet in New Orleans. And the second one, I arrived 24 hours late due to some confusion on the part of various people. But, see, those were accidents. I used to be more important than I am today. I used to loom larger in the imagination of my enemies and my adversaries. When I published What Liberal Media in 2003, I was so important that somebody or some group of people went to the trouble of calling every bookstore that I was appearing at and canceling the gig, saying that I had come down with a stomach virus. Thanks. Oops. How do you get this? I guess you pour it. Right. Saying that I'd come down with a stomach virus and that they were really sorry and I had to cancel. And this happened 2 or 3 times, and before we figured out what was happening. And the way we figured it out was they called and canceled the C-SPAN taping, the one that was being taped by C-SPAN. So C-SPAN asked us what was going on, you know, if I was really sick, and I wasn't, so we figured it out and we uncanceled it. But that didn't stop these devious people, excuse me. They went to the trouble of actually somehow killing all the electricity in the bookstore while I was speaking. And this is true. And it was one of those bookstores, I'm sure it's nothing like this one, where nobody knew where the fuse boxes were. So I had to hold this crowd for 45 minutes while they located the fuse boxes and like called the owner and asked them how do you switch them back and forth. And I don't know about you, I don't know 45 minutes worth of clean jokes. I'm not even sure there are 45 minutes worth of clean jokes. So that was a real terror. People always say, oh, welcome to Portland, we filmed The Shining here, you know. You want to know terror. 45 minutes of clean jokes. Anyway, it's a great place today. I didn't get rained on. It's lovely. I walked around, had a good meal. Happy to be here. So why did I write this book? Here's the problem, in a nutshell. You call up Americans, you call up 100 Americans, you say, are you a liberal, are you a conservative, are you a moderate, are you nothing? 19 to 22 of them will say they're liberals. 30 to 33 of them will say they're conservative, and 40-something, whatever's left, will say they're either moderate or nothing, okay? Then you say, okay, I want to ask you a few questions. What do you think about universal health care? 65%, yes. What do you think about raising taxes on the rich to give, to fund a concerted effort to address the problem of climate change? 65% say yes. What do you think about the importance of labor unions? Same numbers. What do you think about tax cuts for the rich? Again, same numbers on the liberal side. What do you think about, some people feel this so strongly that when you ask them, it becomes almost sexual. Or maybe it's me. Anyway, you run down the gamut of these issues. Every single important liberal position has not just a majority of Americans behind it, but a supermajority of Americans behind it, of somewhere between 55 and 70%. Even if you put the question in rather pointed terms, even if you say, do you think we should raise taxes for the purposes of X? Are you willing to sacrifice a certain amount of economic growth in order to protect the environment? Stem cell research. Certainly on foreign policy, it's not even close. 65% of Americans think we should be out of Iraq yesterday, which, by the way, is about the same number, as far as we can tell, of Iraqis who think we should be out of it. No, seriously, both countries have very strong supermajorities in favor of the United States leaving it. It's just the governments that don't. So, what's going on? What's the problem whereby only 22% of people, at most, sometimes it's less, are willing to adapt the label that associates them with the positions that are held by roughly 70% of the people? Why is it, and what does it mean? Well, I'll tell you what it means. It means that those positions don't get enacted, okay? Because the liberal label has become so delegitimated, devalued, attacked, associated with so many awful characteristics in the public discourse and in people's minds psychologically, with weakness and contempt for everyday people's values, and disregard for the family, and unwillingness to stand up for the country and to stand up for themselves. The famous quip by Robert Lowell that a liberal is someone who's unwilling to take his own side in a fight. Because these positions of raising taxes on the rich and having a stronger support for the right to organize, and having a scientific policy that does not allow certain religious prejudices from interfering with those policies, defending the environment, having a cooperative foreign policy. Here's a real controversial one in the media, although among the rest of the country it's not. If one group of people attacks you from one country, you actually fight those people. You don't fight another group of people who happen to have the same skin tone and speak the same language. I mean, these are positions that are held, again, there's nothing controversial about them. If you say them, they're actually common sense positions. I mean, you can argue that the country has moved somewhat to the right in its thinking simply because what is now considered a liberal position used to be considered a common sense position. Used to be the quote-unquote not crazy position. But that's the way it is. The quote-unquote conservatives, and I don't think that the people who run our government are entitled to the term, but the quote-unquote conservatives who have taken over the Republican Party and taken over the executive branch are so extremist by any historical standard, and so ideologically driven, and so incompetent and corrupt. I guess I could go on. That they've got about 30% of the country, and that's not going to go away. That's Bush's base. But everybody else is a liberal by the definitions of our contemporary debate. So that we have this odd situation where most of the country, the majority of the country, is actually to the left of the Democratic Party, because the Democratic Party is responding to the discourse as defined by the media, which, in the opinion media at least, is largely driven by conservative assumptions and conservative assertions. And the country, which isn't that involved with the media, the ratings for Bill O'Reilly are absolutely tiny compared to how many people there are in this country. Responding to actual real life are considered, sort of beyond the pale. The views of the majority are beyond the pale. I remember Paul Krugman had a line about the 2006 election where he said that the Democrats were being dragged by their grassroots into taking popular positions. I really want to steal that line, but I'm too honorable. I give him credit. So, I need one of my books. Here. So I think this was a deliberate strategy, and a very intelligent one, by the conservatives, by the right wing, who have invested. I used to ask myself, why did these conservatives invest hundreds of millions of dollars in destroying the term liberal, which for so many years was a term of honor and had nothing but positive associations among Americans? You know, Dwight Eisenhower called himself a liberal. Richard Nixon called himself a liberal. Joe McCarthy actually used to complain that liberals weren't good liberals. You know, he thought liberalism itself was wonderful. He just couldn't find any liberals who actually lived up to his high ideals of what a liberal was. But since 1960, since John Kennedy, Senator John Kennedy ran for president, no politician with national aspirations has been willing to cop to the label. And it's odd, right? Because as I just said, if you look, you know, and I use good data here. I got to have a doctorate. I take data seriously. It's not just I'm picking out surveys that I like. I mean, I'm looking at data over a long period of time, the exact same question over time. So, you know, you may say that the American people are wrong to believe all these things, but they do in fact believe all these things. So, how do we? And this is really why I wrote this book. How do we get in this situation where only 20% are willing to embrace the label that describes the position that is held by 70% of them? What is so horrible about the label? Well, as I implied a second ago, it's been the topic, it's been the object of a campaign, a 40-year campaign of vilification, vituperation, slander, and libel. And the second part of this book, this is really two books in here for the price of barely even one. No, really. When I wrote What Liberal Media, I was very pleased that it was only $25, and here we are 5 years later, and it's only $25. I think I'd buy it. No. There's two books in this book. The first book is called What Is This Thing Called Liberal, where I do a little history of the term and how the situation that we're in came to be. And then I spend 10 pages explaining what it means to be a liberal. And I have to tell you, I'm very proud of getting it down to 10 pages. I spent 4 years writing this book. But the fact that it takes me 10 pages to do it is one of the biggest problems that liberalism has. That it's very difficult to describe what it means to be liberal in a short group. I'm going to be on Stephen Colbert on Monday night. And I just did the pre-interview. That's why I got here a little late, because they were asking me, you know, the questions about what he's going to ask me. And one of these questions is, you know, what does liberal mean? And like, they don't have time for the answer, you know. It's a big problem. It's a big problem. Then I say, what does liberalism look like? And I give you examples of countries that are liberal countries, even though, you know, that have the kinds of policies that Americans say they want. A short digression. My favorite country in the world, even though I've never been there, is Finland. There's two. I don't know that much about Finland, but I know two things about it. One is that in Finland, there's no such thing as private education. No matter how wealthy you are, you can't buy yourself any educational advantages. And the state will pay for you to go to school as long as you want until you die. So you could be a doctor, and then you could decide you want to be a lawyer, and then you could decide you want to get a PhD in economics, and you could decide you want to be a rabbi, you know. And they will give you a stipend and pay for you forever. So, you know, you could hang out at this bookstore. But here's the really cool thing about Finland. If Bill Gates gets a speeding ticket in Finland, he has to pay like $82,000. Because speeding tickets are assessed according to your income. Which they should be, right? But think how crazy you'd sound if you proposed that in this country. But it's a perfectly reasonable idea. Anyway, and then the last part of the first section is called So What's the Problem? And that's a misleading construction, because there's about, you know, 40 or 50 problems, some of which I spend 5, 6, 10 pages on, explaining why liberalism is in the shape politically that it is. It's improved a bit in the past 2 years, but some of the problems are problems that liberals have created for themselves by making mistakes and being arrogant and overreaching in the 1960s and 70s. An awful lot of the problems are problems that conservatives have convinced the mainstream media to attribute to liberals, but in fact are much more easily attributed to conservatives. And some of the problems are sort of God's fault. I'll give you an example. 1994, right? Newt Gingrich has a revolution and takes over Congress from the Democrats. Cover of Time magazine is elephants charging because the country has turned so far right. 2006, Congress turns back. Cover of Time, by the way, is the move to the center. There's no charging donkeys. Now, the vote in 2006 was a larger vote for the Democrats by popular vote than the vote in 1994 was for the Republicans. The number of people as a percentage of the voting of the people who voted was higher. They voted Democrat in 2006 than 12 years earlier, and the switch was higher. In other words, the people who, from the previous election, who switched from one to the other, was also higher. But the number of seats that switched was lower, and the number of seats they held at the end of the day was lower. So it was lower in relative terms, and it was lower in absolute terms. More vote in absolute terms, more vote in relative terms. Fewer seats in relative terms, fewer seats in absolute terms. And that's God's fault. That's because God created liberals to live together in cool places. And he created conservatives to live in the sticks, really far away from each other, because they can't stand one another. And so where I live, of course, on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, in hell, according to Rush Limbaugh, those people. My vote is worth about 1/70th of what it would be worth if I lived in Wyoming, and about 1/300th of what it would be worth if I lived in Alaska. And there's just nothing to be done. I'm not moving to Alaska, Neither are you, right? So there's nothing we can do about that. But there is an awful lot we can do about a lot of these things. And that's really what the second half of the book is about. The second half of the book is an attempt, and it's an honest attempt. The topic headings are meant to be funny. They're meant, actually, I was telling this producer tonight, they're actually kind of like the way Stephen Colbert would put them if he were playing himself. Things like, when will liberals stop undermining America's values and poisoning the mind of its youth? If liberals are so peace-loving, why do they want to murder the unborn? Why do liberals believe in marriage only for homosexuals? I actually think that one's true. Why are liberals educating our children to be perverts? Why do liberals hate religion? Why do liberals hate the Jews? Why do liberals love activist judges? Why do liberals love to tax and spend? Why do liberals love Hollywood smut peddlers? Did I say that one already? Now, in every single one of these cases, and also, very importantly, with regard to the first part, why do liberals hate patriotism? Why do liberals hate the military? Why do liberals blame America first? And why are liberals so damn elitist? They're the ones you hear the most often that are never questioned. Liberals are actually have a much better record on all of these than do conservatives, if you take them seriously. If you give them some actual normative content and then test for it. What does it mean to be in favor of small government? It means reducing the size of government, right? Well, every single Republican president has increased the size of government in the past 60 years more than every single Democratic president. Bill Clinton reduced the size of government as a percentage of GNP from over 20% to less than 19%. George Bush got it at less than 20%, and it's now over 23%. And this is consistent. Richard Nixon did the same thing. Ronald Reagan did the same thing. What does it mean to be an activist judge? What does it mean? It can only mean two things, one of two things in my mind, or two of two things. Either you're overturning Congress's laws, declaring them unconstitutional, or you're ignoring previous judicial precedent. Right? In both cases, judges appointed by Republicans have overturned more congressional laws than judges appointed by Democrats. Look at the military, okay? Everybody knows, conservatives love the military and liberals hate the military, right? What has this administration done to the military? Think of how it's treated the military. It's, first of all, created more missions than the number of people who have volunteered can handle, or that the country that is willing to pay for it can handle. So the manpower and woman power, I think manpower is actually not a sexist term, but I'm in the kind of place where it might as well be safe. Is stretched to the point where people are doing the jobs that were intended for 3 or 4 people, and being forced to go back over and over with these stop-loss orders in ways that are a violation of the contract that we had with these people, who are already making enormous sacrifices, and risking their lives and destroying their families. It's just amazing that there isn't more outcry about this, in my view. We're sending them. They're sending them there without proper body armor, without defense for their vehicles. There's these towns that are raising money to buy the body armor that you can buy on the open market because the government won't provide it. We're cutting their veterans benefits. We're cutting their health benefits. And we're asking them to do a job that none of them are trained to do. None of them are trained to build a democracy in the face of Shias fighting Sunnis. I mean, that wasn't in the training manuals, That's not a job for an 18-year-old kid. So how is it that, and by the way, and it was all planned by people who had only seen, a military in a parade, never worn the uniform. The only person with any significant military experience involved with the planning of the war was Colin Powell, who opposed it. So what does it mean to show respect for the military? Is rhetoric all we're talking about? If rhetoric is all we're talking about, then liberals do need to improve their rhetoric. I'm totally down with Hillary Clinton in her discussions of the way liberals talk about, say, abortion. That it doesn't need, you need to show respect for your adversaries. That's whose support you need, purely as a pragmatic matter, but also sort of as a philosophical matter. You may be wrong. You may be wrong. So it's important to speak about other people's positions respectfully. But you see how important rhetoric is. Every time some, Hollywood actress says something silly, it's repeated ad nauseum throughout the media. But these conservatives say the most disgusting anti-patriotic things about people. And Rush Limbaugh, he actually sells torture souvenirs. He sells Abu Ghraib souvenirs, on his program. And he is perfectly fit to be seated next to the president's wife for the State of the Union. Dick Cheney appears on his show. The reviews of this book, there's no worse literary genre than an author complaining about his reviews. But I keep getting accused of arguing with the likes of Limbaugh and O'Reilly and Michael Savage and Ann Coulter, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not. There's no point in arguing with these people. They don't have any. They're not interested in data. They don't support what they say. My point is that these people are providing the arguments that are taken seriously in the mainstream media, that are defining the terms of the debate. Ann Coulter, after she called John Edwards a faggot, she gave a speech to young Americans for, they say freedom. I would use a different F word. And she said, "You think it's scary to attack liberals? Look at me. How bad has it been for my career?" Ann Coulter has been on some variation of NBC over 200 times. Over 200 times. For what? For what? Think about what her talent is. It's just abuse. It's just abuse. And you can't have her on those shows unless you're going to take her seriously. You're not allowed to just abuse your guests. They don't do that. So this is how these thoughts permeate the discourse and define it. Now, I do think that liberals have suffered from a kind of Stockholm syndrome and have themselves ingested many of these poisons. And that's one reason I wrote this book, because I think you will actually recognize, if you're honest with yourself, some of the things you believe about liberals, even though you don't want to believe them about yourself. You sort of grant them. And there's no need to. It's the position, it's the majority position in this country, and it's right. It's normatively right. There's no position that says that we should allow the earth to be destroyed by our own arrogance and lack of caring for it. There's no position that says that we shouldn't investigate cures for Alzheimer's because somebody's religion finds it objectionable. If they don't want us to have stem cell research, let them make the case on why this society shouldn't have stem cell research. The idea that God tells me not to do something is not an argument. I'm all for people listening to God and doing what they think is the right thing for themselves, but don't try and make an argument to me about what God tells you, which is just exactly what George Bush said when he appointed Harriet Miers in the Supreme Court. He says, yeah, she's not qualified, barely went to law school, never been in a courtroom, but she's a really good Christian and her church is really conservative. He said that. Exact opposite of what John Kennedy said in 1960. He said, my religion is irrelevant. I will rule in what's best for this country. We've moved to a place where it's the exact, but now they're making their case on the exact opposite principle. So I get back to this position of, is it important to call yourself a liberal when, if you just called yourself a progressive, you'd go from 22 to 41 overnight. That's the way it works. If you just change that word, you get 41%, and that's what both Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama are doing today. They're front page stories in the New York Times 2 days ago, in the Washington Post yesterday, about how raising the question, can a liberal unite America, when, as I just told you, America's already united, basically, under liberal views, if not the liberal label. And Obama wouldn't cop to it, and when Hillary was asked in the debate, she rejected it also. I think it's a terrible mistake. I'm going to read just a couple paragraphs, and then I'm going to stop. Every night I do this. I don't know what I'm going to say when I get up here. Usually I start with this, so I don't know if it works to do it at the end, but you'll let me know. Ever since Richard Nixon walloped George McGovern in the presidential election of 1972, political pundits have treated as a truism the proposition that liberals are out of step with the rest of the nation and therefore unelectable outside the all but unelectable outside the precincts of the Northeast, give or take a college town here or a ski resort there. Now, I guess I'm being unfair to you people. You're neither a college town nor a ski resort. All right. Or places with really cool, enormous bookstores. Where it rains a lot, because they have them in Seattle too. During the course of every presidential election for the past 40 years, Republicans have sought to wield the word liberal as if it were a 6-gauge shotgun. Senator Kerry is rated as the most liberal member of the United States, and he chose a fellow lawyer who is the 4th most liberal member of the United States Senate, President Bush joked. Back in Massachusetts, that's what they call balancing the ticket. Asked to respond, the man from Massachusetts complained but did not defend. It's not real, Kerry told USA Today about the Massachusetts liberal tag. That stuff is just old hokey. It doesn't stand up. People know it's a lot of malarkey. His running mate, John Edwards, was hardly more forthcoming. Asked by ABC's Ted Koppel, "Are you a liberal?" he responded, "No, I don't believe in labels, first of all. I don't think they mean anything. I think what John Kerry and I are mainstream America." Well, as Newt Gingrich has pointedly observed, Kerry says labels are misleading because he understands the labels are the end of his campaign. Look, I have to stop you here and warn you about something. I'm about to quote Rush Limbaugh, and he's going to make sense. He's going to be right about something. It's not ironic. Quoting Rush Limbaugh unironically. The only time you'll ever see it. Take out your cameras. Indeed, even Rush Limbaugh proved uncharacteristically accurate when he pointed out that conservatives evince no such reticence when it comes to labeling. Somebody calls me a conservative, he teased his tongue-tied opponents. I flex my muscles and say, yeah, baby, you want to call me a right-winger? Hell yes, I'm a right-winger. But you call them liberals, they don't want any part of it. They get defensive. What do you mean by that? Why do you have to use the L word? You know that doesn't mean anything. Well, it does. It means a lot. Now, isn't it ironic that what it means is the tradition that built this country and the majority position of the American people? And yet, our politicians are forced to run away from it, and it's treated as a joke in the mainstream media. So I think that's a really bad situation. I think it's bad for the country because we have all these terrible policies and everybody in the world hates us, but it's bad for democracy too because people are not getting the government they say they want. And this is, I think, a very important, it's not the only bottleneck, but it's a very important bottleneck in allowing our democratic system to function. So I think, liberals ought to get up off the canvas and stop apologizing and stop feeling sorry for ourselves. And, damn it. I really want to call this book, Damn It, I'm a Liberal. Because what's the problem? What's the problem? So that's all I have to say. Thank you. So I'll just take questions, and then somebody from the store will stop me when it's time to stop me, okay? Somebody here to do that? Is that okay? Can somebody nod their head and say sure? Great. Okay, yeah.
Well, you spoke about how liberals all live in nice places together and therefore don't have voting power the way rural people do who are more conservative. But actually, aren't there structural issues such as gerrymandering, where since more recently voting patterns are that the congressional areas are specifically patterned to make it so that incumbents have an overwhelming advantage?
That's one problem, but one of the braver things I say in this book is I attack the Congressional Black Caucus. Because the Congressional Black Caucus is in league with the conservatives to draw these districts that give them 95% majorities. I live in a district where Charlie Rangel is and it's a completely ridiculous looking district. But it's drawn so that Charlie Rangel doesn't have to worry about getting reelected. And the right wing loves the Voting Rights Act. They love it. It's why it was reauthorized by the Republican Congress, because it wastes a gazillion liberal votes by bunching minorities together, where minorities, the people who are being bunched together and giving their congressmen 80, 90% support, and it's impossible to run against them, they would be much better off spreading out that support and voting in more people, having more representatives who agree with them. So you're right to point to the issue of gerrymandering, but it's one area where there's a problem with something that an old professor of mine named Ted Lowy called interest group liberalism, where the vision is lost and it's just a bunch of people who define themselves very narrowly getting their spoils. And I think, unfortunately, that's one of the most costly areas that it's taking place. Good question, though. It never comes up. Yeah?
I think you omitted something in your opening discussion.
I'm sure I did.
The reasons why liberalism became a dirty word. I don't consider myself a liberal, not because the right wing has demonized it or anything like that, but because I associate it with the segment of the political class that slid to the right the political wins in the late 70s and enabled Ronald Reagan to enact most of his agenda. And I agree with you about the strategic necessity of taking access.
Yeah.
I'm not sure it's possible unless that can be addressed somehow.
No, but I don't understand. I just want to, I don't know, I don't understand, and so I'm guessing other people don't understand. You're saying the people who slid to the right in the 70s, the liberals. Are you saying liberalism slid to the right, or we just lost those people to the right?
The people who
the Reagan Democrats?
came under that, well, not necessarily the Reagan Democrats, but the political class, the elites, who were known as liberals.
Yeah. So you're saying, like, in the old days we had George Bundy and Ted Sorensen, and now we have James Baker and Karl Rove. Is that your point? I just don't understand what you're saying.
The word liberal, the first person I think of is Bill Clinton. Who gave this man.
But he's not a liberal, and he never called himself a liberal. So he's not a liberal.
Yes,
You should think of somebody else.
That's how people see it in public mind. I'm talking about how Democrats enabled Reagan to enact his agenda, even though they still controlled most of Congress. There was definitely a shift to the right among the political class that is.
That's true. There was a shift to the right of the political class. There was a shift to the right. All right, I deal with that in the book, actually. There was a shift to the right in both parties, and a slight shift to the left on the part of the American people. And these things happen simultaneously. And one way to explain it, I mean, actually the Democratic Party shifted slightly to the left. But that was because the entire southern part of the Democratic Party picked up and went into the Republican Party. So there are no Southern Democrats there are hardly any Southern Democrats in the House of Representatives anymore. And the ones that are there from in the Senate are either just recently elected or were hanging on for dear life and are barely alive. But it's true that the political class. I mean, you make a good point. Honestly, I don't think you made it that well. But you make a very good point. You make a very good point that the political class and the political discourse have shifted to the right, while the public has not. The public has not. And it's very complicated to explain how that happened, how the right did that. But what the right did is it captured the political discourse. and you got to read What Liberal Media, I think, in the other books too, but I deal with it much more in that book than I do in this book. But they created all these institutions, and they created an alternative media. And this alternative media had two enormous benefits to them. One is that you were able to just live inside their media if you wanted to be a right-winger, and you didn't have to hear things that would have confused you if you were conservative. But more importantly, it acted as a gravitational pull on the mainstream media, so that the mainstream media, in order to get in step with what they thought the country was, started hiring all these right-wing pundits and all these right-wing voices. And those voices are now the majority voices in the opinion media. And they established a point of legitimacy for themselves, irrespective of whether or not they had any credibility whatsoever. So the New York Times, when it decides it needs a second right-wing columnist, picks the single columnist with the absolute worst record in all of Christendom for explaining to people what's going on. Why? Because that person has been deemed legitimate by this alternative media, regardless of any quality, regardless of any journalistic. Bill Kristol has no journalistic credentials, whatever. He's never been a journalist. But they didn't want a journalist. They wanted someone who they could say that they were paying attention to this rightward part of the establishment. And as I said, it's happened with the American people not going along. And there is very complicated reasons for that. I try to express them in the book. I couldn't do it here. Yeah.
Well, as a liberal, which I definitely am and hope I have to grow out of being, in your book, do you consider that you still have a party? Because I look at the Democratic Party and it looks like a center-right party. The Republican Party looks like a far-right party. Do we have a party? And if not, like, how do you in the book or elsewhere recommend that liberals make any effort to get change done without a political party to our name?
Well, first of all, I believe that politics is the art of compromise and cooperation. So just because you don't agree with everything about a given group of people, that doesn't mean you can't work with them to get closer to your goal of what you want, particularly if the alternative is getting none of it, okay? So if voting for Ralph Nader brings you George Bush but makes you feel good because you voted for the right guy, I consider that to be an act of moral vanity. If Ralph Nader had done what Ralph Reed did, which is try and take over the Democratic Party and bring about meaningful change a little bit at a time, because that's the only way to bring about meaningful change, I would have been all for it. I would have thought that was wonderful. Very often at these talks, people say, if you were really a liberal, why don't you support the impeachment of George Bush? And because obviously he deserves to be impeached, and I think any sensible person would agree with that. There's a short, cute answer to that, which is words, President Cheney. But there's actually there's a more important reason for that, why you don't expend your energy impeaching George Bush. And that's because it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. And all of the effort you put into it is going to be wasted because you haven't built anything. Okay? I'm all for lost causes if they're advancing a future effort at winning that cause. But all you do if you spend all your time trying to impeach George Bush is not spend your time doing things that can actually be achieved. So it doesn't bother me that the Democratic Party is filled with people who disagree with me and who see the world differently than I do, because there are a lot of people who see things the way I do, in part, or in different ways. There's a great story. I used to tell this story. In 2003 and 4, I published 3 books in 18 months, and I did 3 book tours, and I spent a lot of time with very depressed people. And I used to tell this story, which is still, unfortunately, a little bit true, but it's, thank goodness, not nearly as true as it was when I told it back then. And that was the story of Newt Gingrich went to see Ralph Reed back in the days when Ralph Reed ran the Christian Coalition, which had 6 million members. And Gingrich had just drafted the contract with America. The reason I know this story is because Ariana was in the room, and then she switched sides, and so we have the intelligence. So I know exactly what was said. And Newt said to Gingrich, Newt said to Reed, he said, "So Ralphie boy, I have this contract for America thing, and I see you have 6 million members. I think it would be a great idea if you would, at your own expense, send a copy of this Contract of America to all 6 million of your members. Oh, and by the way, would you also take out a full-page ad in TV Guide, which is the highest circulation magazine in America, also at your own expense, and just publish this Contract of America so that I can be Speaker of the House. And Ralph said, well, that's an interesting notion. What does it say about homosexuals going to hell? What does it say about abortion is murder? What does it say about all the things that me and my people care so deeply about? And Newt said, nothing. Are you crazy, Ralph? Those things poll terribly. If I mentioned that in the Contract for America, we'd lose the election. And then Ralph said, well, how in the world can you expect me to spend my members' dues and the money I raise on issues that are irrelevant to their concerns? And Newt said, Ralphie, wouldn't you rather be owed an enormous favor by the Speaker of the House than blame yourself for who's at fault for having lost the election? In other words, isn't it better to divide up the spoils as winners than to argue about who's responsible for losing? And I think liberals have been, if back then, if it had, between 1965 and 2003, if it had been liberals in that room, not only would nothing ever get mailed out, they wouldn't even be able to agree on the order of the demands. They were much happier being pure with their own issues than they were with understanding the fact that politics is about cooperation. It's about coalition building. That's what it is. It's coalition building. So I think we've gotten much better at that. But if you think politics is therapy, then you should be for impeachment and you should support Ralph Nader again. Now, guy doesn't even have the Green Party nomination this time, but he's still there, saying things that most liberals agree with. His words are fine. It's just that they're destructive words. They're destructive words because they divide us and clear the path for these horrible people to do these horrible things. Yeah.
I'm hoping this isn't just wishful thinking on my part, but I get the sense that the tide is turning. The younger voters, in particular, the ones who are getting so enthusiastic about Obama, who are registering, who are embracing what it means to be a liberal and not running away from it like us older people have done. It seems to me there's more going on than just the ebb and flow of politics where, we've had a Republican president for 8 years and people are sick of Republicans. I'm wondering, do you feel that same optimism as you look forward? Do you think that, in the grand scheme of things are looking better?
I'm not really about my feelings. I'm about my data. Now, the data does all point in that direction, but it's hard to know how much of it is a gift to us from Bush and Cheney and how much of it is real. One thing, for instance, I do think that the social agenda of the right is pretty much dead. Young people just, in the last election, they had when they started having those marriages in San Francisco, it was in Boston, it was a catastrophe for the swing vote at that point, because people just didn't want to be associated with those kinds of scenes that they were seeing in the news. That doesn't work with young people at all. So in this election, gay marriage is a wash, and in 2 elections, it'll be a wedge issue for liberals, because it's seen as completely intolerant. There's been an enormous sea change in the way that's viewed, in large measure because young people just don't even get what the problem is. Abortion is trickier. Abortion is really a problem. People hold basically a liberal position on abortion, but they don't like to talk about it the way liberals talk about it. They are much more. They're very uncomfortable with the position they hold. And liberals talk about it as, we have the right to an abortion, and that's all there is to it. Well, that's not the way most people see it. That's not all there is to it. So the issue of abortion, like the issue of security, even though people agree with what liberals say about national security today and not with what George Bush says, they don't trust them. They're not at the point of trusting them. And I would say abortion, they're not at the point of trusting liberals either. So I think it's real important to talk about these issues as values issues, because there are important values in supporting the right to choice, and there are values that conservative people and religious people can respect. Personally, I have a lot of problems with abortion for 2 reasons. One is, personally, I don't know, I can't figure out when life begins, so it makes me uncomfortable. No one supports abortion 8 8 months and 30 days into an abortion. So exactly where it starts, I'm just uncomfortable with that question. But I also think, as a political matter, most states, you can't get an abortion in places now where you couldn't get an abortion when it was illegal, by and large. I mean, as a practical matter. The state of Mississippi, which has 3 million people, there's one abortion clinic for 3 million people. And it's hard to get into because, you know, the protesters are out there making you feel terrible if you go in. And I called up I was trying to, you know, look at this. And I called up a group called Americans United for, you know, God or something. What were they called? Whatever they were called. They're nice people. And I said, how does Mississippi figure compared to the rest of the country? And they said it's only number 8. So one abortion clinic for 3 million people, and it's still only the 8th best place in America, according to these people. So by doing the abortion question by the judiciary, you took away the democratic component of it. And you gave people the feeling that this enormous change in their lives was being imposed on them from above without them being allowed to have a say in it. And you know, George Bush won unmarried women without a college education in 2004. He shouldn't be winning those women because he wants to take away an option that many of them feel they need, you know. But they didn't feel they needed to vote against him because of that, because the issue is not on the table in an electoral way. So I think if we had fought the abortion issue in a democratic way rather than a judicial way, we'd be a lot better off. And I do think that's a fair criticism of liberals, that because they started losing it, and it's one thing I don't even like. I mean, I used to like Ralph Nader before he started running for president, but now I don't like him anymore, even in retrospect, because Ralph Nader is the person who's behind this notion of winning everything in the courts and letting our democratic muscles atrophy. And so the conservatives have been using these issues to create a conservative majority across the board in a lot of places. This is the argument of Tom Frank's book, and he's absolutely right. And we haven't fought this fight, and we don't even know how to anymore. So I think this is one problem where liberals have, you know, you have to win these things democratically. If you can't win them democratically, you don't deserve to win them.
So Brown versus Board should have waited until state legislatures in the South acted to change segregation.
Brown versus Board was a problematic decision, in my opinion, because of the words "with all deliberate speed." Not because it was the wrong decision, it was the right decision, but it's one of those cases where liberals, because they were right, they didn't care about the implementation of what they were trying to do. And so they just said, if you don't support integration, you're a racist, and if you oppose us, you're a racist, and here's the plan. Well, the plans were bad plans. They didn't work very well. Busing is a terrible idea. It's a terrible way to implement integration. It's not even clear, it's not even 100% clear that if you want to integrate the country, the first thing you integrate is schools. You know, there's an argument, Hannah Arendt wrote an article at the time saying schools were the wrong place to start. You know, and when we were integrating schools, you still weren't allowed to have intermarriage in those same states. You know, that was illegal for a very long time. Marion Wright Edelman and Peter Edelman were the very first intermarried couple to be married in the state of Virginia. You know, in the 70s, I think, or maybe the late 60s. In any case, yeah, I think that having the right principles without getting the right result is silly. Okay? I think that proclaiming I'm right and you're wrong and I'm moral and you're not is counterproductive. So I'm not a legal scholar, and I don't know exactly what the language in Brown versus Board was, and I'm told that the Roe decision is a terrible decision from a legal standpoint. I'm not qualified to say that, but people who I respect say that to me, and I tend to accept their judgment.
But the point is,
you know, can I finish?
Reports that a lot of these very necessary reforms in justice have to wait for a very long time for legislatures to address them.
Yeah. Well, do you know what percentage of New York City schools are integrated if you live below a certain income level? Do you know?
Probably pretty small, but
0.05. So the great victory of Brown v. Board for poor New Yorkers is 1 out of 99. Okay? So I'm saying I care more about integration in those schools than I do about proclaiming the principle of integration. Okay, I care more about getting those kids decent schools than saying I'm for integration tomorrow, and if you disagree with me, you're a racist. We have a different philosophical viewpoint.
But other places in the country,
Don't you
somebody
think
else.
those people ought to have opportunities, some of the liberals here?
Sir.
There's an old statement about don't confuse the argument with the facts.
Yeah.
And, you know, you do your tremendous amount of research, and I can take it, I'm going traveling next week to two of my buddies who are very conservative,
Yeah.
fundamentalist Christian, and the facts don't work.
Yeah. No, you're right. And it's a perfectly fair criticism. I've got.
I'm not criticizing.
No, but it's a criticism of, well, it's a fair point. I mean, I actually, this is another complaint about the reviews of the book that say, well, it's one review wrote, Eric Alterman is a terrible political consultant. Probably true, you know. I wouldn't give a politician a 400-page book to make a speech or in a debate. Actually, you know, someone who's good at that kind of thing is Jim Hightower. So, you know, he's actually, he is actually one of those people, and we don't have that many on our side, who are really good at distilling these complex issues into really catchy slogans in a way that I'm not. Al Franken does a pretty good job too. It's not what I do, you know. I do something else. I think what I do is useful, you know, but even if it's not, it's what I do. So what else can I do?
My point was simply that we can throw all the facts, and we need them, but sometimes there's other problems.
No, I totally agree with you. It's just, but people have to do what they're good at, and you know, this is what I'm good at. I mean, you're absolutely right, and I make this point, you know, I make this point sometimes in academic gatherings, academic liberal gatherings, that one big problem we have is we can't distill what we believe in into a strong 4 or 5 sentences. Ronald Reagan won the election of 1980 by repeating the same 3 sentences over and over and over, and then proceeded to ignore it when he became president. But that doesn't matter quite so much. And we can't do that. We just can't. And we need to do a much better job of it. But you know, I've spent 4 years writing a book, knowing that I had to do it, knowing that I would be going on TV and I would be asked a question, and I still can't do it. So it's a real problem. Liberals embrace complexity, and conservatives don't. And our political system has no room for complexity. You know, Al Gore actually told me that that's why he doesn't want to run for president. He says, because I can't speak in sound bites anymore. And he may be right. I mean, now he could win now just by being Al Gore. But 2 years ago, you know, I said, what is the goddamn problem, dude? And that was, he has a lot of reasons, you know, but that was, he gives you all the reasons why he thinks he can do more doing what he's doing. But that reason actually, which he did say to me, I thought it resonated quite accurately. Yeah.
Do you think we're going to hit a point of diminishing return with our infighting between our candidates to where we're going to do so much damage to us, we're taking our eyes?
I think we've already passed that point.
Do you think we're beyond that?
Yeah, I do. I do. I'm really unhappy and worried about that. But there
I
hasn't
think
been.
our opponent's a very weak candidate. But
No, I don't think he's a weak candidate at all. I think he's a very strong candidate. I do. I'm not all. I was very optimistic 60 days ago. I'm very pessimistic today.
What do you think about Obama recently in his Philadelphia speech invoking the word conservative in reference to values of personal responsibility as taught by his church?
You know, I didn't hear him do that. I don't think. I mean, I don't like to take things out of context. Like, I didn't mind what Obama said about Reagan. I thought he was right what he said about Reagan. I thought Hillary Clinton took that out of context. And so I'm a little reluctant to respond to not having heard this. But I feel like I'm conservative in a lot of ways. I don't mind. The word conservative is a good word. And what the word conservative means is that, and liberals needed to be a lot more conservative, actually, in the 1960s than they were. What liberals didn't have in the 1960s was a healthy respect for the way things are. In other words, the way things are, they're there for a reason. The social setup that we have, the relationships that have been created, the structure of society, is a reflection of very powerful forces, and whether they're economic or historical or psychological or generational, et cetera, et cetera. And if you don't understand those forces, you can't change them. You can't just tell people you have to change. Stop being a racist, and it's going to happen. You know, you have to, with all deliberate speed. You know, these structures in the South were not created with all deliberate speed. They were created very slowly over hundreds of years of time, and they have to be addressed with respect. With respect. Not you don't have to respect the views that they represent, but you have to respect the reality that they represent the honest feelings and beliefs of people who you need to change them. And so I'm not a revolutionary in any sense of the term anymore, as I was, you know, in my youth, because I think that revolutions have no respect for the structures of society, and they inevitably end badly. Inevitably end badly. I can't think of one that hasn't. Yep.
What did you read growing up, and what really stuck with you? Was there anything maybe influential, or what did you enjoy?
I've never been asked that before. I mean, I read a lot. You know, I didn't really have a life. I had books instead. You asking me that as a sort of political philosophical matter?
As a librarian.
Oh.
Who happens to be very liberal.
You know, I don't want to give a glib answer to that. I read the great works of literature, you know, and I read the best American writers who spoke to my life, and I was a very particular me back then, and so people who spoke to me back then wouldn't necessarily speak to other people. But you know, one of the great things about my job is that I've gotten to meet most of the people I've wanted to meet in the world, and a lot of them are writers. And I've also met a bunch of rock stars, because I like to get free tickets to concerts. And when you get them, you have to go meet them, you know, and say thank you backstage. And I hate to meet the rock stars because, like, I've only spent a grand total in my life of less than 5 minutes with Bruce Springsteen. And I'm really glad of that, because I feel that getting to know Bruce Springsteen would corrupt my relationship with the art of Bruce Springsteen. That's very important to me. But when I meet writers, great writers or great philosophers, I got to know Richard Rorty and Arthur Schlesinger, and Izzy Stone was one of my mentors. It's never disappointing, because they have a same sense of wonder about what it is they do. In other words, like if you were to meet, actually this book is dedicated to two people, one of whom is a great writer, Ed Doctorow. And he's very close to Edgar. He's thrown me a book party, and I dedicated my book after him. And Edgar, E.L. Doctorow, he talked to me, you wouldn't know where those stories come from, you know? But he has an enormous respect for the process, for the idea that we're dealing with something that's lasting and larger than we are. And that's, I think, that's kind of it's one way of describing what my religion is, which is that there's this ability to tap into these large things, these forces in the universe that make us bigger than just our own lives. And writers understand when they're doing that. The problem with rock stars is that they think that it's just them, you know, and they become jerks and take a lot of drugs. Not Bruce. Bruce is fine. But seriously, if you had 60,000 people, you know, like if you're in Led Zeppelin and you have 60,000 people going crazy because you play the guitar, you think you're really cool. But it's not about you. It's not about you and your guitar. It's about something much larger than you, and you're just an instrument for it. And the great thing about literature is that it works over time. Rock and roll actually does too. It works over time, so that I can be just as moved by Leo Tolstoy 200 years after he wrote what he did. I mean, I guess not quite 200, but I don't know, I never talked about this, and I should probably think about it more before I talk about it. I have actually given speeches to librarians, but this didn't come up, so. Thanks.
You don't think the term liberal is a lost cause? You don't put it in the lost cause category?
not like trying to.
I don't think we have any choice. I think we have any choice. I think if you give up with the term liberal, then you've ceded much too much of the field, and also you've made it impossible to have a fighting creed. Because a politician can't say, look, when John Kerry said he didn't believe in gay marriage, that he thought, he believed that marriage was only between a man and a woman, just like George Bush. Nobody believed him. I don't believe him. And so you just believe that here's a guy who's unwilling to stand up for what he believes. Okay? And if you walk away from the term liberal, when everybody knows, in Democratic primaries, very few people vote in primaries. If you get 30% of the eligible voters in a primary, that's a lot. So if 20% of the country is liberal, then 2/3 of the Democratic primaries are going to be liberals. So a Democratic candidate can't condemn liberalism because then they're condemning the people they want to vote for, and they're condemning their base. But yet they can't say they're liberals either. So they can't answer the question, and they look like wimps, and they look like they can't speak up for what they believe in. And it's my contention, and this is just a feeling, you can't really test for this kind of thing, but I feel the American people want to support somebody who knows what he believes or she believes, and they don't really care what it is that he or she believes. They just want someone who knows what they believe. It's like when Dwight Eisenhower said, Americans need someone to go to church and pray, and it doesn't really matter who they pray to. You have to be strong in your convictions. I don't know who deserves credit for this observation, but it's a brilliant observation. Americans don't care about issues particularly, but actually they do. The reason is it's not what you say about the issues, it's what the issues say about you. Okay? So I don't think you can give up on the term liberal because of what it says about you. Plus, it's a great term.
Well, I love it, but
Yeah.
do we spend
Yes.
our $100 billion in 40 years and get it back again?
We read the book.
You did.
No, seriously. We read the book. We arm ourselves with the arguments. Fancy arguments like I sometimes use, and believe me, they're not all so fancy. A lot of them are pretty silly. A lot of them are pretty down to earth. It's not necessarily about investing in the term the way that they've invested in the. It's about refusing to apologize for it. Okay, that to me is what it's about. It's about pride. It's funny because I don't really like identity politics. I don't like all these different pride movements. But this is, I think, a word that encompasses everyone in its umbrella. And all it means is that we embrace the legacy of the Enlightenment. The slogan of the Enlightenment, according to Immanuel Kant, is "Dare to know." Okay, we dare to know. We dare to give everyone the opportunity to reach their fullest potential, and it's not just talk. The difference between classical liberalism, which is another word for conservatism, if you leave out the religious aspect of it. So it's another word of historic conservatism. The difference between classical liberalism and contemporary liberalism is that classical liberalism, while we embrace it, it's all talk. Okay, that's why Milton Friedman and Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan are actually classical liberals. They believe in the Enlightenment. They believe in the values of everyone has the same right, everyone has equal opportunity, everyone can be who they want to be. But basically their message is good luck to you, you're on your own. Whereas what contemporary liberals say is we understand that in reality, not everybody does have equal opportunity. In reality, there are all kinds of forces in our society, whether they're monopolies or big corporations or the military or racial prejudice or other forms of prejudice or foreign powers that want to invade us, that require us to get together and make these values meaningful. So that if you live in New Orleans and your home is flooded, it's not meaningful to say that you have the same right to happiness and self-fulfillment that you and I do here living in this nice place. We need to make that meaningful, and the only way to make it meaningful is for the government to step in and protect you from the natural disaster in New Orleans, because nobody else is going to do it. So the point is that what contemporary liberalism says is we're a society, and as a society, we've got to do certain things together to give meaning to our values. And conservatives say, yes, we're a society, but the only value we have is the value of the marketplace. And if you happen to be living in a place that gets flooded and you don't have an SUV to drive you out of there, you know, best of luck to you. Should we be stopping now? I feel like we should be stopping. I mean, that was like a good end line.